Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're dialing in from. Welcome to Data Everywhere, Building a Case for Enterprise Analytics webinar hosted by the ClearLine group. Before we get started, I want to go through a couple of housekeeping items here. We have about 45 minutes blocked out for this webinar, so we should have plenty of time for all the content and, most importantly, the question and answer. During the webinar, everybody is on mute, but we welcome questions, and you can ask your questions via the chat box on your GoToWebinar menu on the right side of your screen. We'll be recording this webinar for future playback on www.clearlinegroup.com, so you can either review it or forward it on to your colleagues. With that, I'd like to review the agenda really quickly here. We're going to go through kind of the objectives of the webinar, go through some brief introductions on ClearLine Group and our presenter today, David Abbatangelo. Then we're going to dive into the meat of the webinar, which is going to be talking about in depth on how to build a business case for enterprise analytics, and then how to put that together into an entire portfolio of analytical applications for your organization, and then how to negotiate and sell that internally so you can get your analytical initiatives approved. And first of all, or lastly, then how to get your analytical initiatives off the ground. And then we'll follow it up with question and answer. So the objective of the webinar, as advertised, was to help you get your analytic projects and programs off the ground. And this is what it should look like on your GoToWebinar screen. Just send your questions to the organizers and panelists only. The webinar today is hosted by the ClearLine Group, and a little background about us is we're a boutique consulting organization headquartered out of suburban Chicago, and what we do is we're highly experienced analytical experts, and the principals here at ClearLine have been delivering analytical solutions to both small, medium, and Fortune 500 companies for more than 20 years. Our mantra here is kind of we've been there, done that. We have very strong business acumen, which is going to come out today when we're talking about building a business case. But we also have the technology expertise in delivering these types of solutions. So our breadth of skills range anywhere from advisory to executive visioning and all the way through project management to hands-on architecture and implementation. Our speaker today, we're very honored to have David Abbatangelo joining us here today. He's the director of ClearLine Group's Business Intelligence and Analytics practice here. He's been doing this for quite a few years. He's got a little bit more gray hair than I do. And he's been doing BI and data warehousing solutions from the unique perspective is he's been on the consulting side, the corporate side, and vendor side. So he's seen all three ways of business intelligence, data warehousing, and how to get analytic initiatives approved throughout those three sides of the organizations. Very strong technology background and also very strong vertical focus background from manufacturing, insurance, consumer practice goods, all the way through pharmaceuticals. He has an MBA in international finance, and the key for today's presentation, he's led numerous business case projects from the consulting side and also the corporate perspective. So with that, let me introduce you to David Abbatangelo.
Okay. Thanks a lot, John. I appreciate it. I think you had more gray, but it's okay. Before we get started, I want to take just a minute or two just to ask a couple questions about the people on this webinar who are watching it to find out more about why you're here, as well as a little bit about you. So if you don't mind, John has put up a poll slide. Why do you want to build a business case and why you're interested in this presentation, and select all the answers that apply. We'll give you 30 seconds or so, and then I have one more quick question to ask. See numbers moving, that's good. When they start to stabilize, we will show the results.
Okay, we're going to close out the poll here, and we'll share the results here real quick.
Okay, so basically, looks like most of you want to be able to quantify the value of analytics, and then a few of you, about a third, just in starting on an enterprise analytics initiative, And then a couple are more project specific, and others are have an answer to management for why things cost so much. So that's good. If you're looking just at project funding, this will address that as well as the program aspect of it. So let's move on to my next question real quick, if you don't mind. Just a little background about our audience and what part of the business you're in. So are you in management in the business side, management in the IT side, operations or execution in the business, and then on the same vein, are you in operations or development in IT? And this is just more so we have an understanding of kind of, you know, where you're coming from. And typically, I think I'm hoping to see a fairly broad mix, because what we're talking about really addresses a lot of the whole organization. So we'll give a couple minutes.
Okay, we're going to close it out here, and we'll share the results real quick.
Okay, so we have a mix here. No IT management, but it looks like business management and operations in IT. And other is probably consultants, or I could have forgotten something here. So, all right, thanks a lot. We'll get on now to the meat of the presentation. So why build a business case? Why is this important? Well, before we get into it, let's talk about a lesson in parenting. When I was a kid, I got 25 cents allowance, starting when I was 6 years old. And my dad gave me an additional dime every year on my birthday. And back then, that meant about 4 candy bars, because they were 6 cents each, or a couple comic books. Putting this together, I figured out that I'm actually cheaper than my dad, even though I thought he was pretty cheap. My kids started at 6 years old with $2 a week, and they get an additional 50 cents a week every year for their birthday. And what I figured out is that the real reason we give allowance is not so kids have spending money, but really it's so they don't have spending money. So what do I mean by that? Well, my dad was right. Money doesn't grow on trees. So we give allowances so kids learn how to spend and save. And I have two kids, and I'm going to call them Ma Abatangelo, Bucks Abatangelo, because my wife really doesn't like me using their names on these public presentations. So, and they also reflect their personalities. So Ba, who's my older son, money burns a hole in his pocket. And he doesn't have it really more than 24 to 36 hours, and his allowance is gone. Bucks, the younger one, actually, who's now 13, can save his money, and he was able to buy an Xbox last year on $250 a week allowance. Basically, he gets $5 and half goes to the bank, so he has $250 to spend. So he is able to save all of that, as well as some Christmas money, to buy an Xbox. So what's different here is that Bucks can weigh the value of his purchase, whereas Ba, everything is equally important. So whether it's Yu-Gi-Oh cards or D&D books or a video game, everything he sees he wants, and there's no sense of prioritization. So how does this apply to what we're talking about today? Well, the corporate world's the same, but slightly different. Right? In the corporate world, I would call people like Ba, Mr. Hungry or Mrs. Hungry Eyes, right? Everything they see they want. The difference is, whereas my kids are insured allowance probably through high school, and they'll both get about the same within a buck or two, corporate budgeting is a zero-sum game. And when sales gets money, marketing doesn't. And so when we're talking about building business cases for analytics, we're competing against a lot of other projects, and some of which are automatically given higher priority. So when times get tough and budgets go down, the last projects that go are, what we call run the business or keep the lights on projects. Analytics projects, on the other hand, are often seen as discretionary and cut pretty quickly. The other side of this is that there's some additional challenges with analytics, and I'm going to call these, the first one in well, we have standards for that and got the money but not the time. First one in is where the first person to bring a set of data into a central repository often bears the brunt of the cost, and others try to piggyback on that and get their requirements into that project. The second challenge of analytics projects is that you're trying to integrate into a more complex corporate environment that has standards. So you need to bring data in and integrate. That has to integrate with other data sets and leverage standard tools that may or may not be appropriate for your project. And then finally, the last challenge is you may have money and budget, but we don't have the resources available to actually get that project done. So this is where building an enterprise plan for analytics comes in, right? Because what it's going to enable you to do is actually prioritize projects based on business impact, start to make these analytics projects as important as run the business projects, because we can look at what they do in terms of impact of the business. So analytics is no longer an also ran. It's really key to success in business. The second thing this does is really reduce the overall cost of analytics, because you start to spread the cost across departments as you lay out a roadmap and vision of how this data is going to be used beyond just one group. And this does a couple things. It ensures responsibility and ownership from all stakeholders, but it also enables you to plan for the resources needed to execute on this 2, 3, 4, 5-year vision of analytics. Let's take a second to talk about our terms and what we're talking about when we're talking about a business case. When I talk about a business case, I'm talking about a very quantified cost-benefits analysis that looks at more than just the total cost of ownership. So often when people are looking at analytics and trying to justify the project, the easy thing to do is look at how we're going to save some costs by improving our infrastructure or putting data in one place. But the big bang for the buck really is on the return to the business, and that's what drives action. So we want to look at both cost savings as well as impact to the business, and you want to do it in a way that is standardized across projects. So regardless of what your organization uses to vet projects, whether it's internal rate of return, ROI, payback, or net present value, you want to make sure that every project is assessed the same so you can compare them to each other. The second thing, when we're looking at an enterprise solution, we want to do the assessment in the context of your broader corporate strategic initiatives and your overall architecture. And then the last thing is when you lay out this roadmap, you want to think short and long term. And when I say short term, meaning you're continually driving incremental value. So every project creates more value for the organization. And when the CEO and the CFO or CIO come to you and say, what have you done for me lately? Every 3 months you're able to give a different answer because you're continually adding value to the business. So let's do it. Let's talk about building these business cases out. And one thing I want to make sure that we all understand is that there's a reason you're building out these business cases. And it's not to justify projects that don't make sense. It's to understand true business value, and so that you can make decisions based on information and rationally based on quantified impact, I guess, versus emotion. And the other thing is the world is bigger than you, so every project may have impact, but just because it does doesn't mean it's going to be done first or done at all, right? We're going to prioritize based on what's going to have the most value to the business. When we talk about the process, it's really identifying your key business drivers, and this should be tied to your strategic goals. And you can get these out of your annual plan. Hopefully you have a strategic roadmap. If you go to your quarterly investor presentations, usually they've laid out your strategic goals for the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Once you've done that, you want to start to map that to data you'll need to actually achieve those goals, and then finally tie projects to those data requirements. And this gives you the components for that cost-benefit analysis for each of the individual use cases. Once you've done that, you're going to lay out dependencies and synergies among projects, prioritize them based on business value, and basically lay out your roadmap, which you're then going to take forward to sell the value of upwards and outwards. So how to build a business case? Really, it's not that hard. It's a little tongue-in-cheek, but the reality is it all comes down to discussions. And it's discussions between people who understand your business, what the gaps are, and what you could do if you had information, talking with people who understand your data environment and what the challenges are of bringing this data together, because then you have two components, right? You have the impact and you have the cost. So you walk through a series of questions and you're going to put this all on paper and document these case studies. And again, remember, I'll say this over and over, the purpose of the business case is to enable sound go, no-go decisions, not to justify projects that don't make sense to the business. So before we start, I'm going to review real quickly a P&L. So if this is an unfamiliar document to you, you need to get acquainted with it when you're building out a business case. Because what we're doing is we're building a request for money, basically, and that's going to be an expense that's either going to come out of your general administrative, your IT costs, or R&D. But at the end of the day, if you want to get funded, you need to be impacting your revenue by increasing it or reducing your total operating cost. If you're not doing one of these two things, your project probably doesn't add a lot of value to your business. And that's why we're building business cases. I'm going to take a second to walk through a case study and then building a business case for a manufacturer I worked with a few years ago. This company was a manufacturer of oil exploration equipment. So basically, if you wanted to drill for oil, this company would sell you everything you needed. It's a one-stop shop, from everything from $20,000 drill bits to toilet paper to put out on offshore oil rigs. They had acquired 20-some companies over 3 to 4 years, and as a result, they had a lot of disparate inventory systems. And what this meant from a business perspective is that if someone called a distributor to buy a product, they would look in their system, and if the product if they didn't have any in stock, it didn't get sold. They didn't have the ability to look at a nearby location to see if they actually had the same product. And this was a function of inventory being in different systems, but also not having a single product master list across which they can compare products that may have had different part numbers in different systems, but were actually the same or similar products. And so they were trying to build a business case for building an integrated inventory data mart. So let's walk through these questions, and we'll start with why is this important? Well, carrying $800 million of inventory has a carrying cost to it of $200 to $300 million. Now, if they didn't do this project, they'd continue to have a negative impact on the bottom line equal to that 25% of extra inventory that was the carrying cost. With a holistic view of inventory, they'd be able to answer questions they can't answer now. And the key here is they can answer questions that will allow them to act, to either increase sales or reduce costs. So what inventory is available where? Who has the part that my customer wants to buy? Which products are hardcore versus fast moving at each location? Hardcore products mean products that hadn't sold for 2 years, and fast moving being products that have turn rates greater than 2%. So if I have a location where I'm not selling my product for 2 years, and other locations are selling it, guess what I can do now? I'd be able to transfer proactively products that I don't sell to locations where they sell, and I can free up my inventory space to put products that I sell. So what's the impact of these new capabilities of having a integrated view of your inventory? Well, you're going to reduce your inventory, which reduces expenses. You're also going to increase your sales, which basically increase your revenues, both of which are good, right? If we go back to the P&L, those are the two things we want to do. The next question, who else would benefit? When you look at this, we looked at it not just from who would benefit from having this inventory in one place, But if we were to enhance this with additional information, what additional benefit would we get? So if we had this cross-reference product list, now salespeople can see all the products across all locations. But if we also brought in a master vendor list and purchase data, we would be able to start to see all our purchases across all locations. And this would have a huge impact on the company, because whereas before we had 20 companies all buying from some of the same vendors that looked like 20 smaller companies, we now look like one big company. So we can go back to our vendors when it comes time to negotiate our pricing and say, look, we looked like a $500,000 customer, but actually in the aggregate we did $6 million last year, and here's the lowest price we paid for each part, and that's the pricing we want. So they were able to go back potentially and really change their contract prices with their vendors fairly dramatically. So we start looking at the business case. We're going to look at two things. One, what's the cost? And here we just basically scoped out projects, and the tool we identified as being key were this integrated inventory data mart and cross-reference master product list. These numbers are not the actual numbers, but put up there for illustration purposes. The second thing we looked at is what's the value. And we looked at both what's the value in terms of reducing inventory, and we put some assumptions in there of, well, we think we will reduce inventory 10%. It has a 25% carrying cost. So if we take the $800 million of inventory we have, reduce it by 10%, and take the 25% carrying cost of that, it turns into $20 million of annual savings just from the reduction in carrying costs. From the revenue side, assuming a 2% increase in sales because we can sell products from all locations instead of just a single one, a 30% gross margin, and $4 billion annual sales, we're looking at $24 million in improvement in your gross margin just from increased revenue. So it sounds easy, but in reality, I lied a little earlier when I said it was pretty easy. Getting numbers on paper is not that hard, so the mechanics of putting together a good business case isn't that difficult. What's hard is getting people to commit to it. So the hard part is that this requires a little bit of intestinal fortitude, because once you put a number on paper, people are going to hold you to it. So how do you deal with that? The fear of actually committing, IT committing to a cost, and the business committing to an impact if they actually have data. So how do we deal with this cowardice? Well, first off, just confront your fears. You have to do this, right? You'll never have enough information to give an exact answer, but you'll have enough to give a qualified answer. And we're going to call it hedging your bets. So when you do these initial estimates, you're looking at a couple things. One, it's a high level, plus or minus 50%. This is part of standard software development life cycle. You have your high level requirements, your scoping phase, that you're going to do a plus or minus 50% scope estimate. When you get more detailed requirements, you're going to increase that maybe to 75%. When you do your detailed technical design based on those requirements, you're going to be at a 90%. So remember, what we're doing here is we're basically scoping projects at a high level to come up with a plus or minus 50%. And you need to make sure that you communicate this every chance you get. This is high level, plus or minus 50%. If you need a greater degree of accuracy and confidence in your estimates, then scope a project to do the requirements. So give a plus or minus estimate on a scoping phase, out of which will come a plus or minus 75% estimate. Also documenting your assumptions so that when a year from now you're over budget, you can go back and say, well, it was based on these assumptions, here's what's changed. And finally, have 3 sets of drivers. So creates 3 scenarios for each of your project estimates, one of which has conservative assumptions on the drivers, one of which are moderate, and one of which are aggressive. So you kind of have a best case, worst case scenario to work from. So I'm going to talk through a use case real quick. This was for a different client, and it is around auto fraud detection, and they wanted to try and predict auto fraud, and that had a pretty good impact to the business. So what we did is lay it out basically, what do we know about auto fraud in this case. So we knew the number of claims, the average claim amount, total claim amount, and from that, the average number of claims and the number of claims and average claim amount, we came up with a total claims paid, which we knew. We also knew the number of known fraudulent claims, the average amount paid on those, and that gave us a total fraudulent claim amount, which in this case, comes out to about $35 million a year for a very large insurance company. The other thing that we knew is, well, we estimated was kind of our level of fraud detection based on what we thought the industry average, to be. And this is really the driver that you change, right? We want to change our detected fraud rate. So we're going to build out our business case when we look at numbers later based on our ability to raise the detected fraud rate. So this is the first part of your business case, right, is your use case. The second part is the cost. And the thing to note here is that when you're looking at the cost, you've got a couple things. You have a single use case could have multiple projects. And in this case, to enable that fraud detection, we had 7 or 8 projects, a couple of which were bringing data into the warehouse, premiums and claims data, 2 of which were around building a scoring model and actually reporting out the scored claims, and then 2 of which were related to training people in the field for this new business process, and finally, putting some infrastructure in place. The thing to note here is that some of these projects, the first 2, for example, premium data and claims data into the warehouse, have benefit outside of the claims organization. So sales would definitely benefit from premium data. Product development would benefit from having claims information. So as we look at the next steps of laying out our roadmap, we want to start identifying who in those organizations would benefit from this data, because we're going to ask them to foot some of the bill. That's the whole purpose of the roadmap. And here we can see this is a sample business case worksheet where I've actually taken our initial assumptions, created 3 different versions. This is simple. We only have 1 driver we're changing. If you're looking at maybe customer churn or sales, you might have multiple drivers. If you increase the number of customers and things like that, you might have 2 or 3 drivers. But in this case, we're only really adjusting the detected fraud rate, and that's what those gray cells indicate, the drivers we adjusted for each of these scenarios. So what have we done so far? We've made our wish list, just like my older son, of all the things we want to buy and all the projects we think are going to have impact to the organization, and then we've run the numbers to build business cases. So the next step really is to look at this from a more global perspective and start to build out your analytics roadmap. And to do this, we're going to consolidate our business cases, look at the associated projects and put those into tracks. And those tracks are really going to follow along 3 different lines in general. Foundational, where your data infrastructure that the whole organization benefits from, and there could be multiple projects tied to it and use cases built off of those. Process and organizational, and this could be things like building out governance processes that may not exist for data governance. And then finally functional, where we're looking at specific business uses of information. So whether it's increasing sales by having common inventory, or auto theft fraud detection, specific projects around driving specific business impact. We're also going to look at the low-hanging fruit, because part of this roadmap is you want to constantly sell the value and you want some quick wins. A lot of times there's education that has to be done around these new initiatives, and to educate you need some quick wins. So you're going to look at what's a project with some impact that we can do relatively easy. finally lay out all the dependencies on projects, and once you have your roadmap laid out from a project perspective, you're going to look at when, over time, different capabilities are going to be enabled. And you'll see this later when I show you a slide of a finished roadmap. So assessing the portfolio and consolidating the business cases, the thing here is you want to make sure you're looking at apples to apples when you compare one project to another. And what this here is a simple, it shows a 5-year revenues versus costs, and then it's got the standard financial metrics tied to this project. So we can see year by year, what are the costs we're incurring, what's the revenue difference, and then we can see, when the payback period is, what's net present value is, and then, IRR and ROI. And again, whether a project goes forward depends on what metrics you use as an organization and what your internal hurdle rate is. So identifying low-hanging fruit, giving those quick wins, you're going to do a couple things. You're going to create a matrix that graphically shows you where all these projects fall in terms of effort and impact, and what you want to find are the low effort, high impact. And the thing to keep in mind here is that low effort is not necessarily the lowest cost. It might cost more, but it might be easy to do because all the data is in place. It doesn't have significant dependencies. You want it under 3 months because basically you want to show some value quickly. So when you lay out these roadmaps, you're always trying to think of, again, if someone asks you, what have you done for me lately, you want to be able to give a different answer every 3 months. So here's what I did the last 3 months, here's what I did the last 3 months. And then you also want to make sure you're not doing anything around data quality. You want to bring in data on these quick wins that is not in question. So this is probably going to be more around taking data you have and sharing it out in a more effective way so people can solve specific business problems. And again, your quick payback is good. And if you have something that has broader appeal or solves a very clear pain for a specific organization, those are both factors to consider in which projects you do first. This is a sample roadmap we've done. And what I've done here is I've bucketed into 3 different tracks. One of which is really supply chain data integration. So it's bringing in inventory, it's bringing in purchasing, and it's bringing in sales at different points in time. It's also looking at building out master data, and that is, we got projects identified to build out a master product list, master supplier list, and also down the road financial hierarchies. And then the bottom is, global cross-functional analytics, where we're going to bring in additional data sets down the road, so we can build things out like supplier scorecards and things like that. So what we have here in yellow are the projects we're going to execute. The boxes in gray are the capabilities that get enabled. So when we start looking at the inventory example, bringing in a master product list lets me look at which products are the same across systems. Bringing in the inventory into one place lets me look at all the inventory across my company, but I still can't see all the like products across the company until I bring those both in together. So you can see we progress from a global view of the product when we have the product hierarchy to all data when we have just the inventory, but when we bring them both together, then we have a global view of inventory, and this means when a customer calls me, I can see where that product sits that he wants to buy, even if I don't have it in my location. So this mapping of capabilities to projects is crucial to making sure that you can help sell the value of this roadmap. So now what? You've laid out this roadmap. This really is where a lot of the hard work comes in. To get here, it's a lot of work for a lot of people. But now you need to take this forward and you need to start to build a business case of the value of this roadmap so that people can start planning their budgets for next year and the following years so that you can actually execute this. And there's a few things you're going to use. One, you're going to use that roadmap we just built because that's a picture of what value we bring over time with each of these projects for the investments we're going to make. Another tool that really is invaluable is building a mock-up, call it a working prototype of what your future day in life looks like for your analysts, for your financial planners, for category managers, whomever's going to take advantage of this information. And the thing here is make this tangible, make it portable, make it web delivered, easy for you to pull up if you're in a meeting and you're talking about funding or you're talking about these projects. Make it easy for people to get to this and show it to people. Don't get hung up on data. It's okay for data to be static. And I like to think of it as an oil field. When you build these demos or mock-ups, I envision an oil field that has a lot of oil wells on it. And your dashboard kind of has all these metrics. They each kind of equal an oil well. But you only have to have a couple that really go down to oil. So when I pull up this dashboard, I want people to see a vision of what my future looks like and everything we're going to be bringing in. But I'm only going to have to drill down a couple metrics, and those are going to be the ones probably that we want to get funded first. The second thing that's really important here is now when you have these tools, you need to socialize this plan. And it is iterative. So you've done a good job of bringing together your initial plan, your cost, your impact, but don't get wed to it because you need to change it to get it funded. So the tools for that are previewing this mock-up, previewing your plan, getting the feedback, adjusting it, reviewing it, and then going through it again. And do this in what I call outwardly spiraling circles. So you can start with your project team, you can go from there, take the mock-up you develop, take it to the next layer out of people who maybe were involved in the interview process but aren't the funders. Get their feedback, take it up to their managers, then take it up the chain until you have the highest levels of support. And sometimes you might find you may need to more accurately quantify some of the projects, and that's fine. So what you're going to do is you're going to add projects to your roadmap to get more clarification on requirements or to prove out technology or prove out concepts where you don't know maybe some of the financial impact of your assumptions. So now what? I think John's going to talk quickly about how do we get this off the ground.
Yeah, David did a great job walking through how to create the business case, the portfolio, and then talking a little bit about the I like the oil field analogy about building a mock-up of what you're trying to deliver. But there's a couple ways you can do this. You can do this on your own within your organization, and this presentation we did here today kind of gives you a good framework for that beginning. But there's some challenges with that where, typically, even though you might iteratively build out the business case and the portfolio, in the annual funding meeting, you only get one time at bat or one time to present. And, building this stuff from scratch, it requires a cross-functional initiative, and there's resource constraints, and have all those questions you mentioned, having to go out and ask all those questions, build an analytical mock-up and everything. It's a lot of work to do on your own. So, we recommend here, there is value in bringing in a trusted partner like a ClearLine group, at least for the first one. We've been doing this for years. We have years of intellectual property and experience doing this. You walked us through, you mocked up the data, but a couple of case studies you walked through were from actual projects that you've done, and there's also some advantage and some impartiality bringing in someone like a ClearLine group to help out with these types of things. And the graphic here kind of summarizes some of the templates and metrics and an example mock-up that we've done in the past here. So just kind of as a summary before we jump into the questions and answers here is, what is a ClearVision? That's the name of our offering here at ClearLine Group. You kind of mentioned that it's a short, focused, analytical engagement here to meet the overall objective of this webinar was to help you get the projects funded. Typically, they run anywhere from 3 to 12 weeks. A simple, one or two analytical applications or initiatives that you're trying to deliver may take 3 weeks. That one you showed with multiple analytical initiatives, the 5-year scope, may take a little bit longer. Here's a summary of the deliverables. We kind of went through this in depth, which is the individual business cases, the cost-benefit analysis, and the working mock-up. And then finally, the results are, the key is it's proven success. We've done this again and again. But we would provide the documentation that we require to help you negotiate and sell this internally. We can actually help with the negotiation and selling it too. And the key is help build the support for the analytic investment throughout your organization. So that's kind of the summary of the prepared content here. What we want to do now is to jump into some questions and answers. At any time, we've got a couple that have come in, but you can just type into your questions box and go to webinar the questions that you have, and David and I will take a gander here at answering them. So let me take a look at the first question that we had come in here. How many people are typically involved in a project?
So typically there's a mix of resources. You'll have a project manager, a solution architect, probably one or more business analysts, depending on the scope. A large number of people are involved in building the business cases, for small bits of time, and then these are typically identified as part of your pre-planning, pre-project planning. Who you're going to need to have involved and when, from a business case perspective.
Thank you. The next question was you showed some examples. How complex can you get with these business cases?
You can, you can get as detailed as you want, but the thing to keep in mind is that you're trying to build an initial pre-project estimate, and like I talked about earlier, the SDLC should include re-estimation at different phases. So really, you're trying to get enough information to, come to a 50% plus or minus estimate. And if the project is potentially complex enough that that's difficult to do, there's too many unknowns, then scope a requirements project where you can drill into your unknowns to come up with a more accurate estimate.
Okay. Let me check. Okay, another one that just came in is, how do you know when you have the right level of detail for making a go or no-go decision?
Well, you'll never have all the level of detail that people want, but at the end of the day, you need to make a decision. So the question is really going to come down to individual project decision, the level of risk you're willing to accept. And for example, when we talked about that fraud case, the Vice President of Claims had been working with his research team for about 2 years to come up with a model, and they kept saying we need more and more information. And at the end of the day, he was comfortable funding a 6-week project to get what they could and to learn a little more. And out of that, he was able to learn enough to fund a bigger project. So a lot of it comes down to what you're comfortable with. I'm not sure I answered the question, but that's my answer.
We got a couple more minutes here to stay on our 45-minute time frame here, and I have a couple more questions here. Do you need to build a demo or prototype?
Well, I don't say you need to, but I think you really should. You're trying to build support, for projects, so the cost is shared, and people really need to see how their role is going to be different, if they invest money in this. So it's good to have something tangible.
Okay. Another one is, what about predictive analytics? We've tried to quantify these in the past.
So predictive analytics are hard, right? Because you don't always know the impact. So a lot of companies will, they look for predictive analytics projects are typically high risk, high reward type projects. And a lot of companies will say, if we have one that pays off, it's going to more than pay for the others out of 10. So what I typically do is look at them as a portfolio. So, if you identify 10 predictive analytic projects, look at the total cost as your cost, but then look at the average return as kind of your payback. and then use that to do the assessment of it.
Well, I want to be cognizant of everybody's time here. There were a couple more questions that came in. Unfortunately, we can't. I want to, like I said, be cognizant of everybody's time. So we will address those offline. Once again, the webinar has been recorded, so we will send you an email with a link to the recording so you can share with your colleagues, or if you want to review pieces of the webinar, we appreciate it. So once again, I wanted to say thank you for everybody for attending today's webinar, and have a great remainder of the day.